trust, and we've been talking in our transition plans going forward that actually if you look at what's got us through as leaders, as teachers, as a society through this crisis, it's been being a creative and critical thinker. It's been showing resilience. It's that motivation, that engagement, or all the stuff that basically the characteristics of effective learning, which, you know, are a fundamental part of the EYFS curriculum, and then just stop at the end of foundation stage. And actually, when I show and share those characteristics with head teachers who are perhaps not as familiar with foundation stage, quite a lot of them say to me, but these are life skills. You know, actually, if you look at those characteristics, they're what I want for me. I want to be resilient. I want to be motivated. I want to be engaged. I want to be a critical thinker. And yes, the key skills, you know, the core subjects are important, but without being able to apply those in a skilled way to the absolute unique situation you find yourself in, they're pretty useless, really. It'll only get you so far. Some people struggle to understand it, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. I don't mean that in a patronising way, but if you've never worked it, to the untrained eye, it can look a little bit like, well, sometimes not even organised chaos. You know, it can look a bit chaotic. It's Cathy Brown who says it's easy to observe what you know, and dismiss the stuff that you don't understand. So sometimes, you know, what I see when I walk into a setting and what somebody who's not a trained early years specialist sees are two very different things, because it can look quite chaotic. And so I think there's definitely a case for people understanding that just because it doesn't look formal, it doesn't mean that it's not academic, and that our youngest children definitely learn in a very different way, and they need that experiential learning, but there is very significant learning going on. And I think, you know, I do a lot of what I call narrated visits. So we'll go into a classroom together with somebody who usually says to me, oh, I think it's good, but I'm not quite sure. So we go and have a look together, and I'll talk through and I'll narrate, this is what I'm seeing here, and do you see how the teacher is doing this and how that's moving the child's learning on? And it's a little bit of a light bulb moment when people kind of go, oh yeah, I get it now. So I would, if I could, I would ban the phrase just play, because, you know, you hear people saying that all the time, oh, they're just playing. Well, no, they're not just playing. Play is, for play's sake, is a purposeful thing, and we need to value it more. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there around getting people to understand that just because it doesn't look like Key Stage 2, it doesn't mean it's not academic. I think it's about recognising that those characteristics underpin everything. What we know from the research is that there's a significant amount of research that shows that children who are good self-regulators at 5 actually do better, not just at the end of EYFS, and sometimes not at the end of EYFS, but actually later on. So there are several studies showing that children who can self-regulate, that can put their long-term goals ahead of the short-term needs, they're resilient, they stick at things when they're tough, they're motivated, they're engaged, they're interested. They do better than the children who are better readers and writers and mathematicians at 5, because it stands to reason, really, doesn't it, that if you've got those key skills with a good teacher, you will make progress, you will do well. If you're a child who always has to be led to everything and spoon-fed everything, then what happens when somebody stops spoon-feeding you? And I think, you know, it's something that people talk about with me frequently at university level. You know, sometimes for children, that is the first time that they get to a point where actually I have got to go and do my own research and think for myself. That's quite a sweeping generalisation, I appreciate that, but I do think we have a system in the UK at the moment, and certainly in England, that forces teachers almost into that exam factory kind of idea, you know, and I've seen it with my own children where, you know, they knew, you know, how many marks they needed to get on this answer, what you need to put in it, and it becomes more about the product than the process. And we need to go back and look at that process and say, actually, what is it we're trying to get our children to be able to do? What do we want them to be like when they leave school? So yes, the clutch of qualifications, brilliant, but if they can't apply those skills and use them in a meaningful way, they're pretty useless, really, aren't they? Yeah, I think people are afraid to take risks sometimes because there is a fear, you know, that actually one inspector that, you know, doesn't like what it is that you're doing can have a significant impact. And I speak as somebody who's inspected myself, so you know, it's a challenge to make it a human process, and it should be. I really feel that inspection should be a dialogue. It should be a conversation. It should be professional. It should be challenging, but there should be an element of trust. And I think where inspectors get it right, that is brilliant. And you know, obviously working in school improvement, I see that from the other side, and I see some fantastic inspectors who work with those head teachers when they're in their settings and schools. But that element of fear is always there. You know, when that call comes through, even if you're really experienced, your heart, you know, sort of drops to your stomach, and there's that, oh my goodness, I hope this is going to be fair. And I wonder if going forward we need to talk more and have more dialogue between the sector and the inspectorate about what would be a fairer system, what's the best way to do this, and be genuinely doing with rather than to. Wound. For me, the gap, I have a bit of an issue with this whole deficit discourse around children. I think, yes, you know, I'm not going to deny and say that if you grow up in poverty, there will be things that you will not experience. And I particularly think it's often an experience gap rather than a vocabulary gap. I think, you know, you need to have those experiences to talk about those things. So, you know, and I certainly felt that when I went to university, I felt quite out of my depth because people had got experiences that I just never had. And, you know, you can find yourself shying away from certain conversations because you don't want to make a fool of yourself because you think, I have no idea what they're talking about. That's way beyond my area of expertise. And that starts early. That starts with our very youngest children. So things like Sure Start, absolutely brilliant for providing those experiences and also for giving parents confidence. You know, that's probably the biggest thing. I was lucky to be ahead with a school with 2 children's centres attached. And what I saw was, you know, some things that on the surface, again, a little bit like early years, didn't look particularly challenging, you know, baby groups, stay and play, drop in, but it was that feeling of community and you're part of the team and there's somebody there who can help you. And maybe if you pop into the drop-in, you know, it might be that you might have the confidence to ask a question that, you know, some of the parents that we work with got their first qualifications through doing work that had come about as part of Sure Start. And, you know, even some simple things like come along to a pamper session, have your nails done, and then all of a sudden the end result of that over a long period of time is we've got a qualification and now for the first time ever I'm going out to get a job that I've always wanted to do, you know. So I think some of the stuff, I think the problem with Sure Start is some of the stuff people just couldn't measure it in the same way that the bean counters like to measure it. Some of that was not as easy to measure, but really, really important.
Okay.
I sometimes find it quite insulting. This whole narrative around cultural capital is quite problematic because who decides what is the best that's been thought and said, and actually, you know, whose culture do we value? And so, as somebody who grew up in a former mining community in the middle of the miners' strike, you know, there was a very rich culture in that community in terms of, you know, I played in a brass band, we went on holiday together in bands, we were all members of the St John's Ambulance because that's what you did, because, you know, that they were the people who saved you if you had an accident kind of thing. And so there was this really rich culture, but, you know, we perhaps because we didn't go to the opera and the theatre as much, does that mean that it's less worthy? And I just think it's a little problematic and a bit sweeping to say children from less affluent backgrounds will not have had as much schooling. We don't know. You have to get into the fine grain. So I think we just need to be really, really careful. I really worry about the narrative around parenting. This notion that if you're you know, poorer financially, you are a poorer parent. Well, actually, one of the best things you can give, especially with your youngest children, is time.